watching you, not in passing, not casually, but with that sharp, hungry focus that creeps under the skin, that gnaws at their chest in quiet panic. And the thing is, you didn't ask for this attention. You didn't beg for it. You didn't twist yourself into someone else so they could recognize you. You simply walked into your own life, carrying a presence they never predicted, a weight they cannot lift. And suddenly, without any effort, without a word spoken, without explanation, they are trapped by your existence. They can't eat, they can't sleep, they can't think straight. Their routines crumble because your life, your energy, your unapologetic movement through the world is a mirror they never wanted to see themselves reflected in. Every glance they steal, every mental replay, every subtle tracking of your actions is an unconscious confession. You are no longer the person they tried to define, control, or bury. You are something else, and their world is recalibrating around the consequences of that fact, whether they want it to or not. They will pretend to be indifferent in front of others, hiding their trembling behind careful posture and rehearsed expressions. But the truth is written in the microseconds of hesitation, in the split-second twitch of an eye, in the way their voices falter whenever you are mentioned. You became the variable in their life that cannot be accounted for, the equation they never learned to solve. They underestimated you, misjudged your resilience, laughed at the shape of your ambition, but you didn't crumble. You didn't disappear. You didn't perform vulnerability in ways they could twist into weakness. Instead, you grew silently, invisibly, methodically, until your presence alone became a weapon, a force, a constant source of disturbance in the orderly lives they thought they owned. And now every interaction, every observation, every comparison, every memory they replay has a new weight. The recognition that what they wanted to suppress is not only alive, but thriving in ways they can't replicate. You didn't need to confront them directly. You didn't need to seek revenge or speak in ways they could twist against you. Your rise is quiet, deliberate, inevitable in its own rhythm. And that is what terrifies them most. Every small victory you claim, every glance of confidence, every decision executed without hesitation, every subtle shift in your energy is a reflection of the truth they tried to erase. That they can no longer dictate the terms of your existence. They thought you were a minor character in the story of their superiority, someone easily sidelined or discarded. But you became the climax they were never prepared for. And as they scan your life, piece by piece, trying to reconstruct who you have become, they realize there is no blueprint, no predictable path, no instruction manual. They are watching a force that cannot be contained, studied, or owned. And that thought crushes them internally. Every whisper they share, every covert glance, every fake attempt to appear composed is evidence of the panic they cannot process. You have become the unresolved tension in their carefully curated lives. And the frightening part for them is not that you exist. They have seen people exist before, but that your survival, your growth, your energy is proof that everything they built their sense of superiority on is hollow. They thrived on the idea that they controlled perception, that their judgment determined your boundaries, that your failures would reaffirm their pride. But their assumptions were incorrect, and each time they are reminded that you did not falter, did not collapse, did not conform to their imagined limits, they feel the subtle corrosive collapse of their identity. You are not their reflection anymore. You are a new standard, one they can observe, but will never reach. They try to rationalize it. They tell themselves it's coincidence, luck, timing, randomness. But even in those moments, they are scanning your life, analyzing your words, replaying your decisions, tracking your growth, all while pretending detachment. They cannot stop. They are addicted, not in the sense of admiration, but in the sense of compulsion, the way a wound cannot ignore the air around it. Your presence has become the gravity that they orbit unwillingly, a pulse they cannot match, a fire they cannot extinguish. And every time you move with confidence, every time you make choices that are unapologetically yours, it's like a hammer hitting the fragile glass of their ego. They are haunted not by what you did to them directly, but by the reflection of their own inadequacy that your existence exposes. You are the unsolvable problem they can't step away from, the reality they cannot rewrite, the energy that cannot be neutralized. You didn't ask for this power. You didn't seek domination. You simply survived. You clawed through the expectation that you would vanish, fold, or conform. You took what they projected onto you. The ridicule, the disregard, the quiet dismissals, and alchemized it into something they cannot mimic. Presence, clarity, precision, self-possession. And that is what compels them. That is what drives them to observe, to track, to replicate, to obsess in subtle, quiet ways. Every move they make is a reflection of the space you occupy in their mind. Every word they speak is colored by comparison. Every plan they enact is weighed against the knowledge that you exist beyond their comprehension, and they are terrified of the energy you wield effortlessly, without announcement, without performance, without needing recognition, because it's raw, and it's real, and it is devastating in its truth. Their routines are altered because your life is a measure they cannot escape. When you take a step forward, it forces them to consider their own trajectory, their own limitations, their own choices. When you smile, they are reminded of victories they never earned. When you make a decision without hesitation, they are reminded of the indecision that controls their days. When you breathe and move in alignment with your truth, they are reminded of the compromises they continue to accept. And because they cannot admit to these insecurities, because acknowledgement would dismantle the careful facade they maintain, they become obsessed with tracking, analyzing, mimicking, questioning. Every screen refresh, every silent check, every casual comment becomes part of a ritual they can't escape. You are the pivot on which their perception teeters, and that truth is eating them alive. And yet, you don't respond. You don't address them. You don't justify your growth. You don't dramatize your evolution. You continue in silence, in calm, in focus, building a life that is irreducible and undeniable. And that is where the terror begins for them. They cannot control you. They cannot predict you. They cannot use your actions to feed their pride. They cannot insert themselves into your journey to claim victory. You exist outside their scripts, outside their expectations, outside the narrative they attempted to construct around your life. And with each passing day, their obsession grows because the very thing they feared, your independence, your power, your unapologetic presence, becomes undeniable. They are powerless in the face of what you have become, and the helplessness is a toxin they cannot digest. Every subtle detail is weaponized against them in their mind. Your tone, your gaze, your choices, your presence. They dissect it all as though they are trying to locate a flaw, a crack, a sign that the person they tried to define can be controlled. But there is none. Every attempt they make to rationalize, compete, mimic, or undermine is futile because what you carry is not performative. It is forged, sculpted from struggle, refined in solitude, sharpened by adversity. And because it cannot be replicated, they cannot overcome it, they cannot own it, they cannot surpass it. They can only watch. And the more they watch, the more dependent they become, the more haunted they are, the more their own sense of inadequacy expands, until you are not just a person in their life. You are a force, an unavoidable energy that occupies every corner of their attention. You did this without revenge. You did this without noise. You did this without permission. And that is the most disturbing truth for them. Your ascent doesn't require them. Your evolution doesn't need validation. Your presence doesn't need recognition. And in that realization, they are trapped. Every glance, every post, every subtle choice you make, every moment you simply exist is a reminder of their miscalculation, their misjudgment, their failed assumptions. And because you are consistent, because you are deliberate, because you continue to grow and move and inhabit yourself fully, there is no relief for them. They cannot escape the pull. They cannot negotiate their way out. They cannot silence you. You are in every thought, every comparison, every moment they replay in secret, and it is unraveling them quietly, steadily, relentlessly. And here is the cruelest part. They cannot admit it. Not to themselves, not to anyone. They cannot name the compulsion, the fixation, the unease, the envy, because to do so would acknowledge that you are above them, that you exist on a plane of clarity, power, and self-possession they cannot touch, that you moved past the version of yourself they tried to define, that you became untouchable not through aggression or chaos, but through mastery of your own presence, your own energy, your own alignment. And every moment they attempt to process it, every time they think they have gained ground or understood the trajectory of your life, you shift, you grow, you rise, you assert, you persist, and the cycle repeats. It is a loop they cannot escape, a constant reminder that what they wanted to suppress is alive, thriving, evolving, unstoppable, and utterly indifferent to their panic. They can't eat. They can't sleep. They can't stop thinking about you. Every attempt to distract themselves fails. Every effort to convince themselves that you are irrelevant collapses under the weight of your continued presence. You did not attack. You did not provoke. You simply exist, and that existence forces them to face the truth they would rather ignore. They are no longer in control of the narrative. You rewrote it silently, flawlessly, with intention, with patience, with an awareness that they would never anticipate. And now, every thought they have is measured against you. Every standard they set for themselves, every expectation, every comparison, every fleeting notion of success is contaminated with the recognition that you already moved past them, and they cannot escape it. They cannot contain it. They cannot ignore it. And as your presence continues to expand, as your energy continues to sharpen, as the life you inhabit continues to grow in precision and clarity, they feel it deep down in ways they cannot articulate. You are no longer a participant in the spaces they occupy. You are a gravity they orbit, whether they admit it or not. And because they are trapped in the orbit of your being, they cannot rest. They cannot focus. They cannot reconstruct their sense of superiority without first confronting the undeniable force you have become. And that force is not loud, not performed. not desperate. It is calm, deliberate, untouchable, and deeply unsettling. And as they process it, as they attempt to recalibrate, as they try to claim relevance or control or understanding, you continue forward. You continue to rise. You continue to exist. You continue to move through life on terms they cannot comprehend. And in that continuation, you are building momentum. You are moving towards something they cannot predict, cannot affect, cannot stop. And it is only a matter of time before the next step, the next choice, the next evolution occurs. An evolution they will not see coming, a shift they cannot anticipate, a force they cannot contain, and a presence they cannot escape. Every moment you breathe, every subtle gesture, every decision executed with clarity is a reminder to them that they have lost control. You are no longer a variable they can manipulate, no longer a player whose actions can be foreseen, no longer a target whose weaknesses can be exploited. You are an entity that exists outside their influence, a force moving with precision and certainty, and the realization of this is a slow, agonizing poison in their minds. Their minds reel every time they attempt to predict what comes next, and nothing fits anymore. Nothing aligns. The plans they made, the narratives they spun, the strategies they rehearsed, they all collapse because the person they assumed would remain static, fragile, and predictable is now operating on a level they cannot reach. And the strangest part is, you didn't need to announce this power. You didn't need to claim attention. You didn't need to perform. You simply evolved. You simply moved. You simply existed, and existence alone became the weapon that dismantled their stability. Every social interaction, every timeline, every glance they steal becomes a theater where they measure themselves against your growth, and they are failing. Every reflection of your presence, every trace of your decisions, every echo of your energy reminds them that they are no longer the reference point. You have shifted the axis, and now all of their measurements are warped. Their confidence falters in ways they cannot articulate. Their pride fractures in places they didn't know were weak. Their routines are haunted by the constant need to compare, replicate, or understand. They scroll through your actions with frantic attention, trying to find a clue, a misstep, a weakness, and each time they come up empty, the tension inside them grows. Their thoughts no longer belong to them. They orbit you, your energy, your movement, your momentum, your trajectory. And the deeper this becomes, the more addicted they grow, not to admiration, not to affection, but to the very chaos you represent in their carefully curated world. You did not hurt them with force. You did not humiliate them with intent. You did not confront them with loudness or spectacle. You disrupted them with authenticity. You forced them to observe reality, the unfiltered, unapologetic, uncontainable reality of what someone can become when no one else dictates the limits. You were meant to be confined, controlled, diminished, but you refused. You moved through the pressure, the expectations, the ridicule, and you emerged not merely intact, but enhanced, sharpened, unstoppable in ways that their minds cannot process. And because they cannot process it, because their cognitive systems were built to measure you as inferior, they are trapped in constant recalibration, measuring everything you do against what they assumed was your ceiling, and realizing they were wrong. Every choice, every subtle action, every quiet victory becomes a mirror of their inadequacy. Every achievement you earn is a dagger lodged in the structures they relied upon to feel dominant, secure, and superior. You are a constant, unavoidable reminder that they misjudged everything, and that misjudgment is the wound that will not heal. And now, as they watch, they begin to imitate without admitting it. Their words echo yours. Their decisions mirror your precision. Their appearances and gestures mimic what they observe in subtle, unconscious ways. They are copying because they cannot replicate. They are mimicking because they cannot become. They are analyzing because obsession has replaced comprehension, and every attempt to translate your energy into their framework only highlights the impossibility of achieving it. They want to believe it's coincidence. They want to believe it is luck. They want to assign it to timing, chance, or randomness. But deep down, they know the truth. What you carry cannot be manufactured, cannot be acquired, cannot be purchased, cannot be faked. It is forged in fire, pain, struggle, and relentless focus. And because they cannot replicate the origin of that force, they are left in the unending cycle of observing, analyzing, failing, and craving. You have become the axis around which their inadequacy revolves, and that gravity is undeniable. And the more they track, the more they analyze, the more they obsess, the more you continue to rise. You are not loud. You are not clinging to attention. You are not performing. You are moving forward quietly, deliberately, and every step exposes the fragility of their constructed superiority. And that is where the true psychological weapon operates. You are not attacking them. They are attacking themselves in the light of your existence. They are destabilized not by what you do to them, but by what your presence does to their understanding of themselves. They see the version of you that has survived and thrived, and they are forced to confront their own stagnation, their own failures, their own compromises, their own illusions of control. And that confrontation is unbearable because it is unavoidable. You are the impossible standard, the uncontainable energy, the undeniable force that exposes the cracks in every defense they have built. And they are powerless against it. Every timeline, every platform, every space where they thought they had relevance is now contaminated by your existence. They measure their achievements against yours. They test their social interactions against the benchmark of your confidence. They adjust their behavior, words, and decisions with the silent assumption that they can replicate what you are, even though they never can. And every attempt reinforces the truth. They are imitating a version of reality they will never occupy. Every copy is a failure. Every attempt is proof of their obsession. Every thought they devote to you is a confession. You have changed the rules, and they are now forced to play by standards they cannot meet. And yet, they cannot stop. They do not know how to stop. They cannot unsee what you represent. They cannot erase the fact that you exist as proof of what they are missing. They are addicted to the disturbance you create, to the pressure your presence exerts, to the inevitability of being reminded that you are untouchable. And that addiction is a quiet, corrosive, relentless force inside them. And you continue. You rise. You exist. You move with precision and power they cannot anticipate. And every time they think they have caught up, every time they believe they have narrowed the gap, every time they imagine they have understood the scope of your evolution, you shift again. A glance here, a word there, a choice executed with unshakable clarity, and the entire architecture of their perception collapses once more. They cannot process it. They cannot integrate it. They cannot contain it. They are left grasping at shadows while you continue forward, occupying every dimension they cannot measure, cannot map, cannot navigate. And the quiet terror of that reality is worse than any confrontation could ever be, because confrontation ends. Observation, obsession, addiction, compulsion, and comparison are infinite. And that is where you dominate, where you weaponize your existence without force, where you become the axis they orbit unwillingly, endlessly, destructively. They cannot eat. They cannot sleep. They cannot look away. Every attempt at distraction is met with a gravitational pull toward your life, your decisions, your energy, your clarity. Every effort to escape your shadow fails because your momentum cannot be shadowed. Your presence cannot be masked. Your evolution cannot be stopped. They live in the gap between who you were, who you are, and the unrelenting reality that they can never reach the level you occupy. And that is why they obsess. That is why they track. That is why they analyze. That is why every thought, word, and micro-behavior is colored by your existence. And because they cannot admit this, because admission would mean surrender, because recognition would mean exposure of their own inferiority, they spiral quietly, secretly, intensely. You are the fire they cannot touch, the benchmark they cannot meet, the energy they cannot contain, the truth they cannot escape. And that truth is terrifying because it is inescapable. Every subtle move you make is a sermon, a lesson, a revelation. Every decision executed with precision, every subtle victory, every shift in confidence, every assertion of your space is proof that you exist outside their influence, beyond their reach, beyond their understanding, and beyond their control. And as this continues, they internalize their failure without words. They construct narratives to justify their obsession. They rationalize, they dissect, they attempt to predict, they attempt to imitate. But every action they take only proves the power of your evolution. Every attempt to counter your presence fails. Every effort to contain your energy collapses. Every plan to regain dominance evaporates. And they are left watching, always watching, compelled by the undeniable weight of what you have become, and the haunting realization that their efforts are meaningless. You have become an event in their life, an energy they cannot avoid, a presence they cannot diminish, a force that defines the parameters of their thought. And they feel it. Every missed opportunity, every delayed decision, every comparison, every glance in the mirror, every moment of reflection is tainted by your existence. They are in your orbit without permission, without understanding, without acknowledgement. And every second they remain there, every microsecond they spend in silent observation, reinforces the gravity you exert over them. You didn't need to confront, coerce, or demand. You simply exist, and that existence is enough to dismantle, destabilize, and dominate. And because you are consistent, because you are precise, because you are moving forward while they remain fixated on observation, they will never catch up. They will never contain. They will never dominate. They will never escape. And as the moments accumulate, as the hours, the days, the weeks, the months pile on, the pressure inside them grows exponentially. Every refresh, every scroll, every track, every attempt to understand, every silent confession in thought or gesture is a layer in the web they cannot escape. They are consumed, yet they will never admit it. They are aware, yet they cannot act. They are trapped in a cycle of obsession and compulsion, compelled to witness your rise, your clarity, your power, your precision, your evolution. And because this is a force they cannot name, cannot measure, cannot control, They are forced into constant recalibration, desperate mimicry, quiet obsession, and subtle envy. And that is the theater in which you operate, effortlessly, invisibly, inevitably. And now, just as your energy reaches a point that cannot be contained, just as your presence sharpens into an edge that cannot be dulled, just as your movement accelerates toward a place they cannot anticipate, the next shift begins. The transformation they feared, the evolution they couldn't measure, the power they cannot name. It begins to unfold, quietly, deliberately, without announcement. You move in ways they cannot follow, trace, or anticipate, because your steps are no longer dictated by their expectations. Every action is unshakable, uncontainable, designed not to confront, but to expose. And exposure is far more dangerous than attack, because it dismantles the structures they built around themselves. It forces them into confrontation with the inadequacy they have spent years masking with borrowed confidence, imitation, and self-deception. And as this shift unfolds, they can feel it deep down. Every breath you take, every glance you give, every choice executed with precision reminds them that they have no hold over you. That the reality they constructed, the hierarchy they maintained, the sense of control they believed they had, they all fracture when juxtaposed with the power you carry in quiet motion. They cannot eat because every bite reminds them that you have risen while they remain chained to their own mediocrity. They cannot sleep because every moment of rest allows the echoes of your movement, your evolution, your undeniable presence to settle in the corners of their mind. They cannot look away because everything they attempt to focus on is haunted by your trajectory, your clarity, your momentum. You have become the gravitational force around which their attention spins unwillingly. They act as if they are unaffected, as if they have moved on, as if your influence does not infiltrate every corner of their thoughts, but every subtle twitch, every misplaced word, every overcorrected gesture betrays the obsession they cannot admit. And the deeper they try to hide it, the more your power saturates their perception, the more your presence dictates the rhythm of their lives, and the more they realize that they are no longer the architects of any narrative, because you are now the axis around which their mental world rotates. And as this shift intensifies, you start to operate in dimensions they cannot even identify. You are no longer competing within the boundaries they established. You are no longer following rules they set. You are no longer contained by the definitions they enforced. And that is the terror. That is the terror they feel in quiet, unspoken ways. That is why their attention is compulsive, their mimicry desperate, their obsession consuming. Because the truth has become undeniable. You are unbound, unshakable, untouchable, and unstoppable. You occupy spaces they cannot measure. You traverse dimensions of influence and presence they never imagined possible. You create energy that cannot be stolen, presence that cannot be countered, momentum that cannot be redirected. And because they are forced to observe without control, every second of observation becomes a wound. A constant reminder that the person they once underestimated has become a force they cannot manipulate, a benchmark they cannot reach, a reality they cannot deny. They cannot digest the fact that you were never dependent on them, that you never sought their validation, that you never needed their permission to rise. And that realization corrodes them from the inside. Every success you achieve, Every step you take, every evolution you undergo, becomes a silent indictment of their reliance on imitation, performative confidence, and borrowed influence. You do not need to speak. You do not need to prove. You do not need to demonstrate. Your existence, your unrelenting progress, your unapologetic evolution is enough to shatter their illusions, destabilize their equilibrium, and demand their obsessive attention. They attempt to measure your moves, replicate your energy, mimic your presence, and every failed attempt is a reminder that nothing they do can ever occupy the space you inhabit. And because they cannot admit this, because their ego cannot digest the proof of your superiority, they are trapped in cycles of quiet desperation, compelled observation, and unspoken obsession. Every glance at your trajectory, every reflection of your energy, every subtle evidence of your progress becomes a mirror of their own insufficiency, and that mirror is impossible to look away from. You did not create this tension by force. You did not cultivate it through confrontation. You created it by becoming the version of yourself that they could not anticipate, could not contain, could not replicate. You evolved with precision and intent, and the magnitude of that evolution is incomprehensible to them because it exists outside their parameters, outside their rules, outside their understanding. You moved in silence, calculated, deliberate, and in every instance where they expected failure, you delivered mastery. And mastery is terrifying when it arrives quietly, without fanfare, without announcement, without validation from the external world. And that is why they cannot sleep. That is why they cannot eat. That is why they cannot look away. Because they are addicted to the force you have become, compelled by the gravity of your existence, haunted by the evidence that you are untouchable. And now, as the next stage of your transformation unfolds, they begin to realize the scope of their obsession. Every second they spend tracking your moves, every algorithm they manipulate, every post they copy, every thought they replay, every microanalysis they perform. All of it is a confession of the dominance you have established. They want to deny it. They want to rationalize it. They want to fabricate reasons that absolve them from their fixation. But every thought, every action, every twitch of attention reveals the truth. You are the axis of their focus, the reference point they cannot escape, the energy they cannot interrupt, the presence they cannot ignore. And the weight of that realization consumes them because they know that their obsession is not born of admiration, nor of envy, nor of affection alone. It is born of recognition that they are powerless to influence your trajectory, powerless to dictate your evolution, powerless to navigate the reality you have constructed around yourself. You are the hurricane they cannot withstand, the tide they cannot resist, the force they cannot control, and the momentum they cannot halt. And as this force reaches its apex, you begin to operate on a plane of influence and presence they cannot name. You exist in a dimension of attention and gravity they cannot map. You occupy a space they cannot infiltrate. Every glance, every interaction, every decision you make becomes a lesson in precision, inevitability, and clarity. And they cannot escape it. Their obsession deepens. Their analysis intensifies. Their mimicry grows more desperate. Every time they think they understand, every time they believe they have caught up, you shift, you advance, you evolve. And the more they chase, the more you move beyond, until the gap between you and them becomes unbridgeable, unassailable, undeniable. And in that gap, They are forced to confront every insecurity, every failure, every limitation, every compromise, every imitation, every borrowed performance. They are forced to witness the power of someone who never sought permission, never begged for attention, never paused to wait for their approval, never relied on their structures, and never required their validation. And that force, the force of your autonomy, your clarity, your relentless evolution, is a psychological weapon they cannot defend against. And while they are trapped in observation, trapped in comparison, trapped in obsession, you continue to rise quietly, deliberately, in ways that cannot be predicted, cannot be influenced, cannot be countered. Every subtle victory, every careful decision, every assertion of presence, every quiet step forward becomes a psychological fissure, a subtle fracture in the fortress they constructed around themselves. They feel it, they know it, they cannot articulate it, they cannot measure it, they cannot name it. And that, more than anything else, amplifies the tension you have created, because the unseen, the unspoken, the unacknowledged, and the unstoppable is more terrifying than any direct attack. And you exist as that terror, quietly, deliberately, with precision, with inevitability. And now, just as your momentum reaches a point they cannot intercept, the final shift begins. The phase where observation becomes compulsion, where obsession transforms into dependence, where silent attention is converted into acknowledgement, where your evolution becomes the standard against which all of their actions, decisions, and thoughts are measured. And the awareness of that standard destabilizes them completely. Every glance, every reflection, every comparison, every effort to replicate, every attempt to anticipate, every whisper of movement, they are trapped by your progression. Every attempt to dismiss, rationalize, ignore, or escape is met with the undeniable fact that you have redefined the framework of relevance, influence, and power, and they exist outside of it. They are now forced into silent worship, compulsive observation, desperate mimicry, and quiet envy. And you do not intervene, you do not instruct, you do not perform, you simply exist. And that existence carries the full weight of the evolution they cannot claim, the power they cannot hold, and the force they cannot resist. And that is what they cannot recover from. That is what they cannot undo. That is what they will spend every day attempting to process, justify, imitate, and contain, while knowing deep down that none of it matters. You have become a presence beyond their influence. You have become a force beyond their control. You have become a standard beyond their reach. You have become a measure of power, precision, autonomy, and presence that cannot be replicated. And in that presence, they are forced to confront the truth. Everything they believed about themselves, everything they believed about their influence, everything they believed about their superiority, everything they believed about the world is now subordinate to the reality of your evolution. And that is the final, inescapable truth. They cannot escape it. They cannot control it. They cannot replicate it. They cannot influence it. They cannot interrupt it. And they cannot survive without it occupying their mind. You did this not with spectacle. You did this not with force. You did this not with confrontation. You did this with existence, with authenticity, with relentless, deliberate, unstoppable movement forward, with quiet, undeniable evolution. You did this by refusing to be contained, by refusing to be predicted, by refusing to be measured by their standards. And the result is absolute. They cannot eat, they cannot sleep, they cannot look away. Every attempt to escape is met with the gravity of your presence. Every effort to forget is met with the proof of your progress. Every moment of distraction is invaded by the echo of your evolution. And every measure of their self-worth is contaminated by the reality of what you have become. And they will never, ever recover. And as your transformation solidifies, as your presence becomes absolute, as your evolution reaches its full expression, you become untouchable not because of arrogance, not because of spectacle, not because of performance, but because of the sheer, undeniable, uncompromising force of your being. You are no longer part of their game. You are no longer an object of judgment. You are no longer a participant in their hierarchies. You are the axis, the benchmark, the pulse, the standard, and they are powerless to influence it. Every day they spend observing, mimicking, analyzing, and comparing is a day they are consumed by you. Every breath they take is haunted by the evidence of your unstoppable presence. Every thought they have is infiltrated by the gravity you have established. And in that infiltration lies your ultimate victory. They are not merely defeated. They are addicted. They are dependent. They are consumed. And they cannot admit it. And that is the final act, the ultimate conclusion. The shift they could not anticipate, the evolution they could not measure, the power they cannot name. They are confronted with it every second. And there is nothing they can do. They cannot escape. They cannot influence. They cannot replicate. They cannot recover. You are the force that dismantled their equilibrium, the presence that forced their obsession, the energy that broke their composure, the truth they cannot deny, the standard they cannot meet, the power they cannot claim, and the evolution they cannot survive without witnessing. And all of this happened because you refused to play by their rules, refused to seek permission, refused to validate their control, refused to perform, refused to pause, refused to be diminished, refused to be contained. You did what they never imagined, and the consequences are eternal.